Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, death slaves, serfs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ukraine today because a couple of reports have come out that are both expected and pretty astonishing. And that is the fact that now reliable sources say that over 1 million Ukrainian soldiers have been killed. And so that is really, like I say, a pretty astonishing number, but not unexpected. And this doesn't include, of course, civilian deaths, which are probably in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. And then the amount of wounded must be pretty astonishing as well. So the price that Ukraine is paying for this bankers war is really, really incredible, and shows just the things that are done in the name of empire these days. And this whole Ukrainian situation is just so tragic and so unbelievable. And I agree with Trump. This could have been stopped a long time ago. It never needed to start. And so I'll back up a little bit and give a brief overview, because what we have is this narrative that Putin just out of the blue decided to start an unprovoked war and go after Ukraine, and then that the United States and the Western powers are defending a democracy and freedom, and that Russia has designs to start with Ukraine and then start invading all of Europe. And this simplistic and ridiculous narrative is so far beyond the truth. This day and age we live in, that this kind of narrative can exist and be bought by so many people is a tragedy in itself. Because the fact is that the CIA orchestrated a coup in Ukraine, installed a puppet government, then eventually ended up with a former comedian, Zelensky, as the leader of this country. And Ukraine had been, despite a ceasefire, they'd been attacking and bombing the Donbass for 8 years. And so I put forth the idea that Putin was pretty patient, because he waited 8 years to finally do something about the fact that the Russian population in the breakaway region of the Donbass were being not only oppressed but attacked on a daily basis. And so to call it an unprovoked war is really not even close to the truth. And of course, part of this is the overtures by Ukraine and the discussion in the West of having Ukraine become a member of NATO. And this was another thing that Putin drew a red line and said we can't have a NATO country directly on the borders of Russia, and for good reason. Because there was overtures made by the West that all the former Soviet republics and the occupied countries in Eastern Europe would not join NATO, and one after another eventually joined NATO and becomes not a defensive organization against Russia, but more of an offensive organization against Russia. And moving into Ukraine would be just too direct a threat to Russia. And this whole idea that Putin and Russia want to invade the Ukraine and then eventually start invading countries in Europe is just completely preposterous. And that's been clear from the beginning. And in fact, Putin really wasn't interested in the rest of Ukraine other than neutering their ability to attack the breakaway regions in the Donbass. So here we are. This war should have been negotiated away back when Ukraine was attacking the Donbass and could have easily been nipped in the bud. But instead, here we are all these years later. And there's just an unnecessarily slaughter going on. And as stories that have come out have shown, that the average age of a Ukrainian soldier in the field is 43 years old, and that they not only had conscriptions and are now considering lowering the draft to 18 years of age to continue creating more cannon fodder, but they have trucks that go around and just round people up off the street and send them to the trenches. And the average life expectancy of a Ukrainian soldier is about a day. And so just a tragic situation of epic proportions. And one of the other things that's interesting about this, of course, is that, you know, we're talking about 1 million Ukrainian soldiers dead, and Zelensky still maintains that only 43,000 have been killed. And so in this day and age of information wars, once again, the gap between the reality and the fantasy is just huge. And if it was broadcast, certainly in Ukraine, that 1 million soldiers had died, we'd have a bigger problem keeping Zelensky in power. A good example of the complete slaughter of Ukrainian troops and why Zelensky's number is so ridiculous is that back in September, in a single day, Ukraine lost 400 troops. So you amplify that per day, per week, per month, per year, for how long this conflict has been going on. It reminds me of Gaza. The number of Gaza Palestinian deaths is, after a year of conflict is barely budged from initial claims of about 30,000, and now it's about 40,000. And considering the firepower being used, we have a lot more credibility to give to figures as high as 500,000 Palestinians killed. And I've done a video on that. But another good example of this is this Kursk offensive that Ukraine launched, and within a few months they lost 18,560 troops just in that one offensive action. And all this military hardware that the U.S. is sending over there is just getting decimated. And in fact, the much vaunted Abrams tank that the U.S. sent over there and NATO members sent there, they're just getting obliterated. And that's the top of the line U.S. tanks. So this whole idea of using World War II and sometimes even World War I tactics in a modern war with the kind of technology that's involved now, it's truly a slaughter. But yeah, 18,000 troops, 133 tanks, 64 infantry vehicles, 97 armored personnel carriers, 850 armored vehicles, 500 other motor vehicles, 146 pieces of artillery, and 32 rocket launchers, all decimated in one couple of months in Ukraine's Kursk incursion. And of course, now we're in this position too where up to $180 billion the U.S. has given to not only sustain the country of Ukraine and also military aid, but of course it's ironic, and the American people have every reason to be outraged that all this money goes to sustain the entire country of Ukraine, including their paying their civil servants, paying for their electricity, paying to sustain their infrastructure, paying their government workers, paying for their pension programs, and yet the U.S. needs a lot more of that help themselves. So everyone has good reason to be outraged. But the totals of money going to the Ukraine for weapons is just a cash cow for the military-industrial complex and the U.S. military, because all that aid is basically money going into the pockets of arms manufacturers in the Pentagon, because the Pentagon supplies all these weapons, and then they buy new ones from those same arms manufacturers. So it's just a total cash cow, and that's what this is all about. You know, another $1 billion was given by the Biden administration recently, and then the frozen Russian assets stolen from Russia are now being up to $50 billion are now going to be dispersed to Ukraine. And it's all such a tragedy because this war could never be won. It could never be won from the very beginning. And yet all the Western powers of the United States have pushed for this slaughter to go on. And not only that, it's a transnational corporation's delight because they want control of trillions of dollars of minerals available in Ukraine. They want Ukraine's world breadbasket and agricultural land. And all these assets are being sold off to Western transnational corporations by Ukraine. And then, of course, we have Ukraine is hardly a democracy. And then all the oligarchs and all the people in the military, including Zelensky, are just pocketing a bunch of this money themselves. One of the most corrupt nations in the world. They were before the war started, and they certainly are now. Most of the oligarchs, including Zelensky, are going on worldwide real estate buying sprees. And so this whole situation is just about as disgusting as anything can get. And I know I recently called Syria one of the worst geopolitical clusterfucks of the 21st century, but Ukraine is right up there with them. And for this slaughter to go on, to make bankers rich, to make arms manufacturers rich, to make transnational corporations rich. And then, of course, we have BlackRock is all set up to cash in, reconstructing whatever is left of Ukraine after this is done. And then most recently, of course, we've had the Biden administration and the Western powers of NATO, especially Britain, supplying long-range missiles and giving them permission to hit targets inside Russia. And so the Western powers keep poking the bear. And I'll say once again that Putin has shown a remarkable restraint, considering that the Western powers just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, like they want a wider war. And it's definitely a proxy war on steroids, because it's a showdown between the Western powers and European powers and the United States and Russia. But it's on such an epic scale that and the U.S. and European involvement is so intrinsic and so overwhelming that it's practically a direct war between Russia and the United States and Europe, and a lot of people have come out and said that. So I'm painting this all in very broad strokes and just stream of consciousness, because there's just so much here to talk about that's just so despicable. I could do a video on just about every single point of interest I've brought up in this video, but I'm getting lazy in my old age. But these new numbers coming out of 1 million Ukrainian soldiers slaughtered for nothing is just astonishing and disheartening. And it looks like the incoming Trump administration, they've talked about the idea of restraining the Ukrainians and maybe cutting off supplies with one hand, but the other hand is talking about continuing this as necessary. And so we'll see how it goes, because even if Trump goes in there and manages a ceasefire, it'll be just like all the other ceasefires. There's a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon right now, and Hezbollah, and the slaughter goes on. And also, if there's a ceasefire, it will just give both sides a chance to basically take a breather, restock, reload, and go at it again. So sorry this is so rambling and so all over the map, but I'm just exhausted by the situation in Ukraine, and now to hear numbers like this, it's just heartbreaking, and it's all for nothing. I'm a useful idiot, don't you be one too?